Welcome back everyone. Today we are going to look at the game between Koneru Humpy and Nurgyul Salimova in the final round of Women Grand Prix held in Pune. Humpy opens with d4, d5, c4, c6 and they exchange the pawns. This is the exchange variation of Slav defense and knight c3 by Humpy, knight f6, knight f3 and knight c6. Here Humpy played bishop f4, a6 by Salimova to prevent the knight jump to b5. Here Humpy played queen b3. Now Salimova plays knight a5, which attacks the queen as well as it defends the b7 pawn. Now Humpy moves the queen to queen c2 and g6 by Salimova. Her idea is to next to move bishop to f5 and which attacks the queen. Now then e3 by Humpy and bishop f5 by Salimova. In response, Humpy plays bishop to d3 and now they exchange the bishop. Here Salimova plays e6 and Humpy castles. And knight c6 by Salimova and rook f c1 by Humpy. Here Salimova plays bishop b7 and knight a4 by Humpy. Her idea is to put the knight in the d5 square which attacks the b7 pawn. Therefore Salimova responds with the knight d7 to prevent this move. Here Humpy plays a very good move, bishop h6, and it prevents the short castling. Now Salimova plays queen a5 which attacks the knight. Therefore Humpy plays queen d3, it defends the knight. Now Salimova plays rook g8. It is a big mistake. It also loses the castling right to the short castling right, and it also weakens the pawns here. Her idea is to push the g pawn and some counterplay here, but now the Humpy has a very good move, that is the h4. Let's wait and see she finds that move. Yes, she finds the move h4, which actually prevents the move of the g5. Queen d8 by Salimova. Here this pawn is attacked twice, therefore the Humpy plays a nice move, knight g5, preventing that idea. Now Salimova plays bishop to d6, which is a mistake. Now Humpy has a very good move, that is the pawn to e4. Let's see if she can finds that move. Yes, she finds that move and plays e4. Now if you capture this pawn, you don't need to recapture with the knight. Instead you can play pawn to d5, and if you capture this, you can recapture with the knight, and the mating one is threatened by queen and the knight. Now if you play like queen to e7 to prevent that, you can even sack the rook for the knight, and if you place this one you can recapture, then the rook is attacked. This pawn also is weak and your rook can swing over to here. In the game she didn't capture the pawn, she directly plays queen to e7. Now Humpy captures the pawn on d5 and then recaptures, and queen d3 played by Humpy, and knight queen f6 by Salimova, rook to e1 check, and bishop to e7 blocking the check. Now Humpy has clear advantage, that is the plus 3.5 advantage is having, because the king is in the center and the rook can swing over to c1, and the long castling is not a good idea at this point. That's why the engine is giving plus 3.5 advantage, but here the Humpy played knight c3, which is a mistake. Her advantage is reduced to plus 2 now. Here Salimova plays knight to b6 and Humpy plays another bad move queen to h3. Her idea is to prevent the long castling, but here Salimova has a nice move queen to f5, exchange the white's biggest active queen. That is what exactly Salimova played, queen f5, and they exchange the queens. Now Humpy plays knight takes this pawn. Also Humpy has an advantage of +2 because she already got a extra pawn and she is going to get another pawns also, because these two pawns are doubled pawn and this pawn is isolated one. So that next move Salimova played castling on the long side, and now Humpy plays bishop to g5 and they exchange the bishop. Now this pawn on f7 is attacked. This point Salimova takes the pawn on d4 and Humpy plays rook d1 attacking the knight. Here Salimova played knight to c6. That is not a good move. Instead she could attack this knight used by playing pawn to f6. Now Humpy can grab the pawn on f7. That's what exactly she did. She grabs the f7 pawn. At this point Humpy is clearly winning, but she has to play accurately because the time also is reduced to 7.5 minutes, 7 and 55 seconds. Now rook d7 played by Salimova attacks the knight and knight came back to g5. Then Salimova plays d4 attacks the knight e2 and rook to e8 and knight f4 by Humpy. Here rook takes rook and rook takes rook, knight pawn to d3. Here Humpy plays a big mistake, knight to f3. Her advantage is reduced to +1.5 from +3. Here Salimova has a nice trick. She can play knight to a4 which attacks this pawn, and Humpy responds with the rook d1 and Salimova plays knight to c5 which is a miss opportunity. Instead she could have grabbed this pawn and which attacks the rook. At least she gets 1 pawn. But in the game knight c5 played and a3 by Humpy, a5 by Salimova and a3 h5 by Humpy. And here Salimova plays knight to d4 and knight takes knight and rook takes knight and g3 by Humpy which defends the knight. Salimova plays pawn to d2 and h6 by Humpy, rook d7 and h7 by Humpy. She gave up the h pawn for this d pawn, so they grabs the both these pawns. This point Humpy has +2.3 advantage because these two pawns are in the same rank, so that it can be attacked by this rook at the same time, and this also in an isolated pawn. So here b6 by Salimova and rook to d6 by Humpy which attacks the b6 pawn. At this point Salimova plays knight e4 as she's hoping in a counter attack at this point or somewhere. She gives up the b6 pawn. Now Humpy grabs the b6 pawn, rook c7 by Salimova. Now Humpy can play rook b5 which attacks these two pawns simultaneously. So that's what exactly she did. She plays rook to b5 and now rook to c2 by Salimova, which attacks these two pawns. So this point is critical, so that Humpy plays knight h3, defends the f2 pawn. Now Salimova plays knight to d6, which attacks the rook, and Humpy plays rook to a5, grab the a5 pawn, and Salimova grabs b2 pawn. Now Humpy plays knight g5, king b7, knight e6, king b6, rook d5, king c6, rook e5, rook d2. Actually here Salimova prevents the knight d4 check. Now Humpy plays king g2, king d7, knight g7, f4, g4, and knight c4, which attacks the pawn. Knight rook e4, knight into e3 check, king d5. That is a great move. Now knight d5 by Salimova. Rook e4, knight e3 check, king f3, knight d5, a4, rook d3 check, and king g2, f3, king g3, knight c3, rook e3, rook into e3, pawn takes the rook, knight takes the pawn, and king takes the pawn. Here Humpy is 2 pawns extra, but the game is tricky. You should not lose any of these pawns to win the game. Even though Humpy has clear advantage, she needs to play very trickily. They played few more moves like this: knight on c5, king f4, king e7, king f5, and king f7, knight h5, knight b7, knight f4, knight d6 check, knight king e5, knight c4 check, king d4, knight d2, e4. Humpy is slowly advancing her pawn. Knight f3 check, king f d5, king f6, knight h3, knight h2, which attacks this pawn. So she plays g5 plus check. She's advancing her pawn, simultaneously moving the king backwards. King g6, king d6, knight f3, e5, knight d2, e6, knight d4 check, king d5, knight d5, knight c e6, knight e4, knight d5, knight c3, knight d5, knight b5, knight f4 check, king g7, knight d5, king f8, g6, knight a7, e7 check. Now Salimova resigns the game because she cannot stop these pawns from queening, so that she resigns the game. Humpy wins the final game and became the winner of the Women Grand Prix held in Pune. I hope you enjoyed this recap. Thank you for watching, and like, subscribe, share, let and comment your thoughts below. Bye.